Welcome to this retrospective slash review for the game Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Episode 1. I'm just going to go ahead and give you my brief thoughts, which I've written most of them down. And, yeah, I will go ahead and say that what you're seeing in the background now is me running through one act of each of the different separate zones, just to kind of give a little visual style for the game, how it changes from zone to zone, basically, and just let you see what's going on here. Now, I did this when I was attempting to get the fifth Chaos Emerald at the time, and admittedly, my playing here is not very good, so please don't judge me too harshly there. I did eventually get it, but I don't think this review is going to last long enough to the point where you'll actually see me get the fifth Chaos Emerald. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my thoughts on the game. And for starters, I will say that this game, from what I have seen in the Sonic community, does have a bit of a bad reputation. And I'm not entirely sure if that's completely warranted, at least in my personal opinion. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's the best Sonic game ever, or even in the top tier or anything of that nature. So definitely not saying anything along those lines. However, I'm not as super familiar with the Sonic franchise. I haven't followed it, since day one or anything. And there's a lot of games, Sonic games, that I haven't actually played around with yet. So I can freely admit that. For me, I've played the original four, as it were, Sonic 1, 2, 3, and CD. And that's pretty much my experience with the franchise. So that's kind of where my opinion is coming from, is like that's what I have to compare it to. And in my opinion, it's not a bad game. It definitely is nowhere near as good as Sonic 2 or Sonic 3. That's just go ahead and get that out of the way. And in fact, this game takes a lot of its inspiration from the first two Sonic games. Well, Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, not counting CD, even though it was chronologically after Sonic 1. But I think it was actually released after Sonic 2. That being aside, basically, you can tell, obviously, it's very much inspired by Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. In fact, both are the four zones that you see in this game are pretty much heavily inspired by those two games. The first Splash Hill zone is obviously a play off of the Green Hill zones from Sonic 1. Uh, the Casino Night zone, I think there's a very similar zone in Sonic 2, this is the one you see here playing right now in the background. And basically, it's kind of a questionable decision on their part. Why did they choose Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1 and Metropolis Zone from Sonic 2 for the other two stages? It's just a very weird choice, since those are pretty much universally seen as the worst stages in both Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. So I do find that choice to emulate those stages a bit of an interesting choice, to say the least. But yeah, the very, very odd choice there. But overall, I would actually say, to a certain extent, that the Labyrinth Zone and was it Gear Warp Zone are actually better than their counterparts from Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. So there is that. Now, there's a lot of issues that people have with the game. For me, my biggest issue, I think, would be the stiff controls. And, I guess it's probably very similar to the first Sonic game, because the first Sonic game was kind of very slow to accelerate. But I guess maybe with the art style here, for some reason, it just feels more pronounced. It may not necessarily be more pronounced, it just felt that way, for lack of a better word. A lot of people talk about the physics in the game being very weird, and to a certain extent, yeah, I think that is a valid criticism of the game. The the way the physics are in it. But at the same time, it's something that I think you can get used to, and I did get used to it. So it didn't really affect my enjoyment of the game personally. A little wonky here and there, but overall, it wasn't so bad that I was just kind of like fuming with rage with how bad it was. So I don't know. I think it's something that I don't want to invalidate people's opinions there, but it's something that I was personally able to, you know, look over, I guess, for lack of a better word. Um, Other than that, I'd say the game itself was actually relatively fun to play. It's a fairly short experience as well. Um, I've even heard criticism being leveled at the music of the game. And honestly, for the first couple of zones, the music it's okay. It's not bad. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say there's any standout tracks or anything, compared to some of like the Genesis games. But having said that, I actually really did like the music in Lost Labyrinth Zone and I keep forgetting it, what Gear Warp Zone or whatever it's called. Basically, I actually thought the music there in those two zones was actually there's some pretty good tracks there. So I'm not really sure, where the criticism for the music comes. I mean, sure, there are other Sonic games that have better musical scores, but at the same end of the day, it's a Sonic game, and I think the music was still pretty decent, at least my personal opinion. So yeah, a little bit of people being a little more critical than they really need to be, in my opinion. But the musical score I think is pretty good. I did want to mention this actually when I'm talking about the stiff controls. Actually, one of the things I did notice, and I'm actually very happy that I put the effort to basically play more of the game and get a better feel, like try to get all the Chaos Emeralds, do some of the time attack mode and things of that nature. Because one of the things I was able to learn when going back and playing the game is with the stiff controls, I realized that Supersonic actually doesn't play with the same sort of stiffness that regular Sonic does. He's much more fluid, I guess would be the best word to describe him. So the only issue is it takes you so long to get to a point where you can actually use Supersonic, and I'm actually kind of happy that I didn't even bother trying to do that with him because it just would take too dang long. But at the end of the day, I do think it would be something I should point out that I feel like Supersonic did control better, perhaps a little bit, too fast in a lot of places, basically, which made it a little hard to control in some areas. But for the most part, I think that Supersonic did control much better than Standard Sonic, which you would kind of expect, to be completely honest with you. Now, speaking of the special stages, one of the things I got to say is initially I was thinking the special stages in this game were actually not too bad because the first four weren't really all that difficult, all things considered. But then the last three for Chaos Emerald 5, 6, and 7, it really kicked my rear end, to say the least. They were very difficult, and that fifth Chaos Emerald, that's probably the one I spent the most time trying to get. So I was going to initially probably give this game a bit of a bonus as far as the Chaos Emerald is concerned, but I'm afraid I can't really do that. And the fact of the matter was, I thought it's like, wow, this is going to be relatively easy to get all the Chaos Emeralds because you can replay the stages. It would be way easier than say in Sonic 1 or Sonic CD, which is the method for getting the Chaos Emeralds is pretty much the same as those two games, where you finish, or I should say the same as the Chaos Emeralds and the Time Stones in Sonic CD. But it's the same in the fact in that you basically have to have 50 rings at the end of the level to play the special stage. The difference with Sonic CD in this game is that Sonic CD gives you an alternative method for getting the good ending that you don't have in this game, or Sonic 1 for that matter. So it makes it more like Sonic 1 than Sonic CD. And also, because you have to play the stages all over again, it's not as good as Sonic CD, because one of the things you could do in Sonic CD as far as the time stones were concerned is you could, if you're getting about to run out of time, you could stop and restart the stage and basically redo the special stage, which is not an option here. So unfortunately, like I said, the special stages themselves are actually pretty difficult for the last three. And the thing is, like, the last one I thought was going to be pretty easy because I was like, the emerald was right there, but it ended up not being easy to say the least. But I just basically, the way you have to do it, whereas you have to keep doing the stage over and over again, becomes very tedious in a way of basically accessing the special stage. Much more tedious, very, very similar to the first Sonic game in that regards, and much like the first Sonic game, a lot of Sonic games really, the special stages are kind of the weak point, to say the least. I wanted to say this game actually probably had a better special stage, but at the end of the day, that's not the case. It's probably in the same category as Sonic 1 as far as special stages are concerned, and that's not a good thing. So, yeah, special stages are yet again another shortcoming of the game, but that's something I've kind of come to expect, to be honest with you, with all these games. And so, if anything, it stays true to the formula for the early Sonic games, and the fact that the special stages are probably the worst aspect of it. Having said that, I wish they had probably taken some more inspiration from Sonic 2 in how they accessed the special stages. Because in Sonic 2, you could get 50 rings and get to one of those star posts, and you could access a special stage, and it worked so much better than basically going to the end of the level like here. So, a bit of a missed opportunity there, unfortunately, for them, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So it makes this probably one of the weaker entries, again, as far as accessing special stages. So let me see here. Having said that, I think one of the things I should have mentioned this, but back when I was talking about the music, I think the graphical style to this game is probably one of the more controversial choices, and that's probably not really a stretch to say that. Really, when you go from the pixel art of the original Sonic games on the Genesis, it's kind of a very jarring transition. Personally, I think it's not a bad art style. In fact, I kind of like it. I think I do prefer the pixel art style easily to this, but at the end of the day, I don't think this is a bad style, but it's very reminiscent of, say, mobile games. It's very mobile game-like, and I think this was one of the first Sonic games that was created for mobile platforms as well as other consoles, and it really does kind of show in that, graphical style, basically. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but at the end of the day, it's not terrible. It's just not really my preferred art style. I do think the pixel art is better, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's bad either. But I can understand where somebody would come from where if they didn't like the graphical style to this game. So I can understand, the gripes there. It's not something that I think is a game breaker for me, but I guess maybe I'm just a little more open-minded to things of that nature, possibly. Who knows? Other than that, though, I'd say this game overall was fairly easy. I mean, the ability to get extra lives, I mean, okay, yeah, you can see right here in the background here, I have 148 extra lives right now just from replaying the axe over and over again. And it's kind of ridiculous how many extra lives you can rack up in the game, which really brings the level of difficulty down. And even for the difficult zones, like Lost Labyrinth Zone and the Mad Gear Zone, completely forgetting the name of that place, but basically outside of those, this game is actually pretty simple. And the final egg station, the boss, basically, that was my biggest challenge in the game, easily. And at the end of the day, I kind of okay. So the boss fights are also a bit unimaginative. They take their inspiration again from Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, almost verbatim for a lot of the boss fights. They change it up a little bit here and there. They have like an extra attack or something, but really it's fairly similar to the point where it does feel a little bit on the unimaginative side, to say the least. So I can see where there would be a little bit of complaints for that from a lot of the community. And, you know, at the end of the day, this does kind of sound like a bit of a negative review, where I say it takes a lot of inspiration and just kind of copycats a lot of Sonic 1 and 2, only without the addition of Tails, which is kind of unfortunate because it would be fun to have Tails here. But I think they did rectify that in episode 2 for this game, so that's cool. But outside of that aspect, I think it's not a bad game, and I think the reputation it gets is a little bit too negative, I think. But at the same time, I think you can't really give it a better ranking than, say, Sonic 1. Because like I said, it doesn't come anywhere near as good as Sonic 2 for sure. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, because it is very easy as well, so the level of challenge just really isn't there. And again, the special stages are just not fun, especially once you get to those final ones. And the method of accessing them is not ideal, to say the least. They did a much better job of accessing special stages in Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. And yeah, this game, unfortunately, it does have its flaws, but I think at the end of the day, I would probably give it a ranking very similar to what I gave Sonic 1. Now, and I'm trying to think, would I rank it equal to or better than Sonic 1? You know, I actually do like the boost mechanic. I think the boost mechanic is, to me, it's a new feature, whereas I think it's probably something other people who have played other Sonic games are already familiar, but for me, it's something new. So it's new to me, and from that perspective, I think it's actually a little bit of a improvement over Sonic 1 from a control perspective. It does really add a whole new way of playing the game, and it's a good addition in my humble opinion. So overall, and I know Sonic 1 is the first game, so it was the one that kind of got the blueprint going. So, and it has more variety in this game, so there's not a lot of variety as well. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go with my gut here and say the game itself is not bad. It is an homage game, for lack of a better word. It's an homage to Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 for the most part. Not the best homage, but it is what it is. And it was probably done better in Sonic Generations, which I've also not played, but that's probably another reason why a lot of people are criticizing this game, because the homage thing was already done prior to this game, and then it was done even better when Sonic Mania came out. if I haven't played those games, so I don't know for a fact, but what people say, it makes it sound like that's basically the overall feel of things, basically. So from that perspective, I think the game probably gets judged a little more harshly because of those aspects. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and give it an 80%. I haven't played any of the other games, but every Sonic game that I've played up to this point, I don't think it's a bad game. I feel that it does feel like a step back from Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, and it's a pretty noticeable setback. But I think at the end of the day, they're also kind of, I don't know, trying to reach out to the mobile market. That's probably a bit of a limitation with the game, and it kind of shows. But like I said, overall, not a bad game, fairly average, maybe a little bit above average in my opinion. That's why I give it an 80%, because I've played a lot worse games, like even worse games here recently, in my opinion as well. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the game. I think it's fairly a slightly above average game. That's why I'm going to give it an 80%. And yeah, I think not as deserving of all the hatred that it gets. And if you're interested in the game, it's very cheap on Steam. I forgot to look up how cheap it was, but it's on Steam. It goes on sale all the time, and it may be worth a shot if you want to give a Sonic game a try. And I think it does also have the benefit of if you have this game and Sonic 2 put together, I think it unlocks a special episode I think called Episode Metal or something, if I'm not mistaken, in Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. Anyway, I'm going to find out for sure here if that's the case, not too long from now, but for now I'll say basically, thank you very much for watching this video and listening to my rambling thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, and hope it's probably worth a try. It's not that bad. Doesn't really sound like a glowing recommendation, does it? But that's how I feel. It's a pretty decent game. Anyway, again, I say thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.